Hi everyone, I'm Tamsin and I'm the Equality and Diversity Officer here at Leeds University Union, and I'm here today with Beth Johnson, a lecturer of class in the media. Have I got that right?
Lecturer in film and media, but one of my research interests and sort of hopefully areas of expertise is class.
Brilliant, so that really fits today, and hence why she's here, because we're looking at class on campus today for the Deconstructing class campaign that is going on at Leeds University Union at the moment. So I'm going to be talking with Beth. We're probably going to both go off on tangents because we just had a massive conversation before this, so it might not end up being all about class, but you're going to watch anyway because we're very engaging. But yeah, so we're going to just get started and hopefully you really enjoy this video. So Beth, thank you for being here today. I am really grateful.
It's a real pleasure, thank you.
So the first question is, how do you define class? Because I know that when I've been doing this campaign, there's been a lot of questions about, well, why are you doing a campaign around class when that's something that is such a big thing? So how would you personally define class?
Oh, that's a massive question. I mean, I suppose particularly in academic terms, class is a really difficult and tricky area. I tend to think about class in relation to the work of Jacques Rancière, and he talked about class being a homily, and he said class sort of had did two things, if you will. On the one hand, it was sort of a label, a classificatory label, and on the other hand, it was a way to speak for those who weren't allowed to speak for themselves. So it has sort of this dual job. But I think class is so many things. It is absolutely a sort of category, but it's also a feeling. It's an experience, and class is shaped not only just by what financial and economic circumstances people are in, but also through judgments about class and through clothing and accent and behaviours, etiquette. So it's really complex and muddy, but I would go with sort of Rancière's sort of double-horned approach to class and the way in which the work that it does.
So there's obviously so much going on. Then we can trace the history of class back through the ages, and it's something that's always existed. How would you put all of that onto the Leeds experience? So this campaign is looking at class at Leeds University specifically. So is there anything that you notice specifically about class on the Leeds campus or in general?
That's a great question. I think that class is part of everybody's experience, both at Leeds and beyond. I think in terms of higher education and in terms of Leeds as a university and a red brick university, I suppose what I would say is that it's linked to what universities do in some senses. Stuart Hall, who's a brilliant cultural theorist, says, universities are critical institutions or they're nothing. And I think, very much one of the roles of universities is to be a critical institution, but it's also about, I think, creating cohesive and tolerant communities. Critical thinking, understanding, increased intolerance. Increased tolerance and decreasing intolerance. In that sense, that's part of the job of universities. In terms of the Leeds class experience, it's so various, and that's something that I think it's really important to sort of keep sight of. Class is absolutely a sort of marker of identity, but also it's one very important aspect of identity, but can be made much more complex through intersectionality. So what does it mean, for example, to be working class and black, how does class as a sort of marker or identifier operate with for example an identification of a disability. So I don't think it's homogenous in terms of a sort of class experience at Leeds, but I do think as a red brick institution and a sort of a research intensive university, there are there is an elitism attached to the University of Leeds, as there is with other, red brick universities, and class is something that's very much associated with and made from material inequalities, and that's something that's really important to look at and think about. I think one of the most important things is talking to students and staff and the university community generally about, what class, how they experience class and what it feels like, and what they see the problems and challenges being, and also what's the university doing really well in relation to sort of class and identity. But it's a big question, and I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking for other people about their class experience. But universities are in lots of ways still elite institutions, and with that there comes inequality. Imogen Tyler, who's a great sort of sociologist, she sort of has tried to reframe the question in some ways of what class is, and sort of says, what is the problem that class nominates? And she says it is the problem of inequality. So I suppose in thinking about what class might mean at Leeds, it's really important to think about what inequalities people feel and experience.
Mm-hmm. I've learned so much from that one answer. I'm so excited to do the rest of this video. So you mentioned intersectionality there, and we were speaking just before this about being like a working class woman. In what ways do you think that gender plays a part in class? Because I think that's not specifically about Leeds. I think there's so much to explore there. So yeah, if you've...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, gender and class, I've seen gender and class referred to in some academic work as sort of almost a doubling up of an inequality, in the sense that, there is at this university and many others still, a gender pay gap. If we look at, those who have the highest positions in the university, there is still a very sort of strong dominance of men. I think class and gender is an area that I have sort of researched, particularly in relation to television, and all or much of the research that's been undertaken so far says that in particular women who are considered to be lower class or underclass, there is a huge and very distinct stigma around that, and we can see that in for example, sort of going back, so thinking about things like, the comic strip, the Fat Slags, the idea that these were women who were sort of out of control, that they couldn't, they didn't have the right sort of taste, they didn't wear the right thing, their bodies weren't the right shape, they said the sort of wrong things. And I've been doing some work recently on the documentary about the Moorside, which focused on the kidnapping of sort of Shannon Matthews, and I've talked a lot in that work about the way in which Karen Matthews' identity was, particularly through both the documentary but through the media itself, that the combination of her class status and her gender meant a sort of almost caricaturing of her as an evil woman. And these things are incredibly problematic, and I think it's something that needs to be sort of addressed in a critical sense, and not just sort of taken for granted. But yeah, women and class as a sort of doubling up of identity injuries, some would say, I think is certainly important to think about. And within the context of the University of Leeds, one of the things that we really want to achieve is that all students have an equitable experience, and that they are all able to enjoy and engage in their studies and communities fully. And I think for both students, male and female, of who identify as working class, it would be really nice to think about networks, because I think a lot of issues around class are also issues of belonging and inclusion, and I think that networks and a sort of strong sort of sense of identity and acknowledgement, understanding about what some of the challenges might be is really important.
Definitely. I think as well so you mentioned media in that as well, and I did an essay on it in first year because I did cultural media studies as my degree, and
good choice.
Thank you. And it was an essay, it was around the representation of the underclass, and I was talking about Joe and Mikhail, and how if you think about the people that go on Joe and Mikhail are often seen as very working class, but it's so acceptable you don't see them critically as working class people, you see them as people who you can laugh at because they're working class, but it feels like a lot of the time the link isn't made to, oh, I'm laughing at working class people, it's like, look at these idiots and stuff. And I wrote about how the way that it's framed, I'm sure you know all of this already, but it just reminded me just then about the way that the audience is like looking down on animals at a zoo, and it's like a coliseum because the people are automatically higher up, like physically. And just when you were talking about the media then, that reminded me, and it's so interesting how much the media does play a part in this.
It makes me think about whose stories are being told, by whom, from what perspective, and television is such a powerful tool. I think there really needs to be more social responsibility, particularly around what seems to be a trend of what some people might call poverty porn, but class baiting, and that social responsibility to not essentially, set people against each other, but instead to sort of increase understanding of people's positions, and also recognise that not everybody has an equal chance. That the lie that essentially, yes, well, if you work hard, everybody can achieve equally. That is not true. Class is essentially a problem of inequality, and that inequality is structural. It's not going to be helped by somebody spending an extra 5 hours a week on their homework. Well, that's not to say that people cannot move classes, and of course, social mobility is also important to think about, but that the sort of social mobility is absolutely, particularly at the sort of lowest end of the scale, is entrenched. So there was a report that came out last week that was in the Guardian newspaper, and that report showed that for the last 5 years, and they used the word entrenched, they said that social mobility, particularly amongst the lowest classes, is absolutely entrenched. There is almost no way in which people can move out of that. So that sort of recognition that it's not about individual stories, it's not about individual choices, that an understanding of class is about structural inequalities, and recognising and working to acknowledge those, and also to talk about them and think about ways in which they can be levelled. Rather than this, oh, well, that's a bad choice, that's a good choice, so you've got that because you deserve it and you worked so hard.
And I think that translates really well onto university campuses, because if you look, we've got the amazing things like the PLUS programme and Access to Leeds, but that's getting here, that's one step. If the experience here, because widening participation students have a higher dropout rate than traditional middle class students, and I'm quite wary about using that term because I know that people don't tick a box on their form saying I'm middle class, I'm working class, but if you look at a PLUS programme as opposed to people that come through the traditional routes, there's a much higher dropout, because the support, when you're here in the kind of isolation, and there's all these factors of being working class on campus that don't go up to the middle or upper classes. It is a purely working class thing where you've got to, it's been spoken about so many times in my focus groups, and I don't want to give any particular examples, but just people talking about how they're treated by their friends and how they're treated by their lecturers, and how their lecturers have sometimes openly mocked their accents, and people have been given icebreakers that have been completely out of line and completely isolating. So, for example, someone having to doing an icebreaker and going around the room to find someone that's been on a yacht, or someone that's been to Bali, or someone, and you know, one of my friends was telling me about how she moved from Hull to Leeds, and two of the people in her accommodation had already gone travelling together in Thailand, so they'd already met, and then they'd invite her on nights out and to prees and stuff, but then we'd all start laughing out of accent, and it's all these things that middle class people don't have to think about. And I think what you're saying is so true about social mobility is all well and good, but until you tackle the structural inequality and the structural things, and there's things that we can do on campus that, although won't completely cause that shift, will definitely get us a few steps ahead by thinking about, well, what can we do to make it more inclusive? It's not about catering solely to the working classes, but it's about making what we've already got better so it does include everyone, because when we're living in a very middle class institution, like you were saying, red brick universities are elite, and we're living in this place that has been dominated by majority white middle class men who have come straight from high school and college because that's always been the plan. What about the people who never had university in their plan, who have got here against all odds, if you will, and then now what? You know, I think it's just such a huge issue.
I'd be so interested to you know, have a look at, if I may, the results of the focus groups when they come out, because they sound fascinating, and it sounds like they contain really useful insights into some of the ways in which we can really, you know, increase and do further work to ensure that the experience of Leeds is as equitable as it can be. But I do think, you know, that there that I mean, some people have talked about class as some sort of theorists and writers as a sort of hidden injury, but in certain places, in certain environments, I think it becomes less hidden. You know, it's certainly more visible. And accent, you know, is something, you know, clothing style, sort of manners, you know. I think these are all important in terms of, again, thinking about the way in which class is shaped, not only through where people feel they might belong, but also how and what elements of them and their identity are judged by others in, you know, really sort of problematic ways. And I genuinely believe, you know, that one of the key jobs of a university is to be a civic institution, and is to increase understanding, and you know, I think, you know, that this is really important work to do, and there's obviously you know, a really significant need for work to be done around class and classed experience here at Leeds, and actually, you know, way beyond this at other universities. But I'm so pleased that this is a conversation that's being had, because I think in lots of places it's not being had, and you know, it's not going to be a quick fix, but you know, it's on the agenda, and you know, students and staff and people are being spoken to about their lived experience of class, and I think that's so important. And you know, I'm just really pleased that it's being talked about and acknowledged and worked on.
Definitely, I'm really glad that I'm glad that everyone that I've spoken to has been so willing to have that conversation and to open it up, because like you said, so many places just kind of brush it under the rug and think that the way to solve it is by just not speaking about it and that the problem will go away. But when it's such a historical problem that permeates every aspect of society, it's never going to go away. So I think the sooner we talk about it, the better, and the sooner we have these open and honest conversations, is better.
And you know, that which is, you know, it's an argument that's used, you know, over and over again. Oh, well, let's not talk about it and make a big deal about it, and then naturally it'll just happen. But you know, I really don't believe that. I think absolutely, you know, there's got to be conversations. There's got to be, you know, some really, you know, important, you know, work where, you know, there's focus groups. There's there's a better, deeper understanding and a real, you know, sort of willingness to think about what can be changed and what should be changed.
Brilliant. That feels kind of like a natural end point. Have we got enough? I'm hoping. Is that good? Are you okay? Brilliant. Fabulous. Well, yeah. Shall I do a little closing thing? Yeah. Fabulous. So, thank you very much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I'll probably do a more emotional thank you afterwards, but it's been absolutely amazing to be able to talk to you, and I just think I'm so glad you've been so honest and candid and open, and being able to share the work that you are doing with us is just absolutely amazing. Thank you. Can't speak. So thank you so much. And yeah, thank you. There'll be a couple more of these videos, so watch the next one if it's online now. I feel like I'm on YouTube, but I've not got subscribers, but you know, hit the like button, share, subscribe and all that jazz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fabulous.